Shelter dog won't stop crying, then vet discovers something terrifying. The howls pierce through the quiet December night, echoing off the concrete walls of Willow Creek Animal Shelter. Emma Carter paused in her nightly cleaning routine, her hand tightening around the mop handle. After 3 months of volunteering at the shelter, she had grown accustomed to the cacophony of barks and whimpers that filled the kennels, but this sound was different. It wasn't just noise, it was grief. Following the haunting cries, Emma made her way down the dimly lit corridor. Most of the dogs had settled for the night, their soft snores and occasional rustling creating a gentle backdrop. But in the last kennel, a tawny Labrador mix named Daisy paced relentlessly, her nails clicking against the concrete floor. Every few steps, she would rear up on her hind legs, scratching at the wall with desperate intensity before letting out another heart-wrenching howl. "Hey, sweet girl," Emma called softly, approaching the kennel. "What's got you so worked up tonight?" Daisy's ears perked at Emma's voice, but her eyes remained fixed on the shelter's entrance, as if waiting for someone, or something. The dog had arrived at the shelter 2 weeks ago, found wandering near an abandoned house on the outskirts of town. She was severely undernourished, her ribs visible beneath her matted fur, and covered in scratches that spoke of desperate flight through dense undergrowth. What struck Emma most wasn't Daisy's physical condition, but the profound sadness in her amber eyes. While other rescued dogs gradually warmed up to the shelter staff, Daisy remained withdrawn. She refused food unless hand-fed, flinched at sudden movements, and spent her days staring at the shelter door with an unsettling intensity. Emma unlocked the kennel gate, stepping inside with careful movements. "Come here, girl. Let me help you." Daisy backed away at first, pressing herself against the far wall. Her tail tucked between her legs, but her eyes never left the entrance. Emma sat down on the floor, making herself as small and unthreatening as possible. She had learned this technique during her animal behavior training. Sometimes, the best way to reach a traumatized animal was to let them come to you. Minutes ticked by in silence. The overhead fluorescent lights buzzed softly, casting harsh shadows across the kennel. Outside, a car passed on the highway, its headlights briefly illuminating the room through the high windows. Finally, Daisy took a hesitant step forward, then another, until she was close enough for Emma to catch the subtle tremors running through her body. "That's it," Emma whispered, slowly extending her hand. "You're safe here." Daisy lowered her head, allowing Emma to gently stroke her fur. As her fingers moved along the dog's neck, they caught on something tangled in the thick coat. At first, Emma thought it was just another burr or twig. They had found dozens when Daisy first arrived. But as she carefully worked it free, her breath caught in her throat. It was a small piece of fabric, no larger than a playing card, with a distinctive floral pattern. What made Emma's hand freeze was the dark brown stain that covered most of it, a stain that looked disturbingly like dried blood. "Oh God," Emma murmured, examining the scrap more closely under the harsh fluorescent light. The fabric appeared to be from a child's garment, the kind of cheerful print you might find on a little girl's dress. The blood had soaked deep into the fibers, leaving them stiff and discolored. Daisy whined, pressing her nose against Emma's hand as if trying to communicate something urgent. For the first time, Emma noticed a pattern to the dog's behavior. She wasn't just randomly distressed. Every time she scratched at the wall or howled, she would look back at the entrance, then at Emma, as if trying to lead her somewhere. With trembling fingers, Emma pulled out her phone and dialed Dr. Caleb Ross, the shelter's veterinarian. Despite the late hour, he answered on the third ring. "Emma? Everything okay at the shelter? Caleb, I need you to come down here right away. I found something that doesn't make sense. It's about Daisy. The lab mix? What's wrong?" Emma looked at the blood-stained fabric in her hand, then at Daisy, who had resumed her anxious pacing. "I'm not sure, but I think she might be trying to tell us something. Something terrible. I'll be there in 15 minutes, Caleb said, the urgency in Emma's voice clearly conveying the seriousness of the situation. As she waited for Caleb to arrive, Emma sat with Daisy, trying to comfort the distressed animal. But her mind kept returning to the bloody scrap of fabric and the troubling questions it raised. Where had Daisy come from? What had she witnessed? And most importantly, whose blood was this? The dog's cries took on a new meaning now. They weren't just expressions of fear or trauma. They were a message, a plea for help. Something dark had happened out there in the woods where Daisy was found, and she was the only witness. When Caleb arrived, his face grave as he examined the fabric under a microscope in the shelter's small medical room, Emma knew her instincts had been right. This was more than just a case of an abandoned dog. This was the beginning of something much bigger, much darker. "Emma," Caleb said, looking up from the microscope with a pale face, "this is human blood. And judging by the cellular structure, it's not more than a few months old." Outside the medical room, Daisy's howls echoed through the shelter once more, but now they sounded different to Emma's ears. They weren't cries of despair anymore, they were a warning, a call to action. Whatever secret Daisy carried, whatever horror she had witnessed, it was about to come to light. And Emma had a sinking feeling that this was just the beginning of a mystery that would shake their small town to its core. The Willow Creek police station buzzed with unusual activity for a Tuesday morning. Emma sat in Detective Sarah Martinez's office, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Across the desk, Martinez studied the evidence bag containing the blood-stained fabric, her expression unreadable. "And you say this was tangled in the dog's fur?" Martinez asked, making notes in a worn leather notebook. "The dog that was found near the old Morton property?" Emma nodded, fighting exhaustion after a sleepless night. "Yes. She's been at the shelter for 2 weeks, but we only discovered the fabric last night. Dr. Ross confirmed it's human blood." Detective Martinez leaned back in her chair, a crease forming between her eyebrows. "We'll need to run a DNA analysis. In the meantime, tell me everything you know about this dog's history." Emma closed her eyes, recalling the details from Daisy's intake forms. A hiker found her wandering near that abandoned house about 5 miles outside town. She was malnourished, covered in dirt and scratches. We checked for a microchip, posted her photo on lost pet websites, but no one came forward. "The Morton property," Martinez mused, pulling up a file on her computer. "That area's been abandoned for years. Local kids sometimes use it for parties, but otherwise." She trailed off, her eyes suddenly widening as she looked at her screen. "What is it?" Emma asked, leaning forward. "The house is less than a mile from where Sophie Reynolds was last seen." The name hit Emma like a physical blow. Everyone in Willow Creek knew about Sophie Reynolds, the 5-year-old who vanished without a trace 4 years ago. Her disappearance had devastated the community, leaving scars that never fully healed. "We'll rush the DNA analysis," Martinez said, already reaching for her phone. "I want officers out at that property today." As Emma left the police station, her mind raced with possibilities. Could Daisy somehow be connected to Sophie's disappearance? The timeline didn't make sense. Sophie had been missing for 4 years, but Daisy was clearly a young dog, probably no more than 2 or 3 years old. Back at the shelter, Emma found Caleb waiting for her. The usually composed veterinarian looked troubled, his white coat wrinkled as if he'd been up all night. "I've been doing some research," he said, leading her to his office. "Looking through old case files from other shelters in the region. Emma, Daisy isn't the first dog to be found in that area." He pulled up several reports on his computer. "In the past 4 years, 3 other dogs have been found near the Morton property. All showed signs of neglect, all were extremely fearful. And here's the strange part, none of them stayed in the shelters for more than a few days before they escaped." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. Escaped? Somehow broke out of their kennels at night. They were never found. Caleb ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "I think they were trying to get back to something. Or someone." Before Emma could respond, her phone buzzed, a text from Detective Martinez. "DNA results rush processed. Come to the station. Now." The drive back to the police station seemed to take hours, though it was only 10 minutes. Emma's mind filled with increasingly dark scenarios. When she arrived, Martinez wasn't alone in her office. A man in a FBI windbreaker stood by the window, while 2 other detectives huddled around a computer screen. "The blood on the fabric," Martinez said without preamble. "It's a match for Sophie Reynolds." The room spun slightly, and Emma gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. "But that's impossible. The fabric was fresh. You said the blood was only months old." "Exactly," the FBI agent said, turning from the window. "Which means Sophie Reynolds might still be alive." Emma sank into a chair, her legs no longer able to support her. "Oh my God!" Martinez spread out a map on her desk. "We've had teams searching the Morton property since morning. The house is clear, but the grounds are extensive. And there's something else." She pointed to a series of markings on the map. "These are where all 4 dogs were found, including Daisy. They form a pattern, circling this area here." Emma leaned forward, studying the map. The points formed a rough circle around a densely wooded area about a mile from the Morton house. "The dogs," she said slowly. "They were trying to tell us where to look. And now we have one that didn't escape," Martinez added, looking at Emma intently. "One that might be able to lead us there." Emma thought of Daisy, still crying in her kennel, still trying desperately to communicate something. "She's been trying to show us the way all along." Her phone buzzed again, a text from one of the shelter volunteers. "Emergency. Daisy's acting strange. Barking nonstop. Won't let anyone near her kennel. We need to go to the shelter," Emma said, standing up. "Now. Daisy knows something, and I think she's ready to show us." As they rushed out of the station, Emma's mind returned to the bloody fabric. If Sophie was still alive, where had she been all these years? And more importantly, who had kept her hidden for so long? The answers lay somewhere in those woods, and their only guide was a traumatized dog who carried a piece of evidence that had eluded the police for 4 years. Whatever they were about to discover, Emma knew it would change everything, not just for their small town, but for a family that had never given up hope of finding their missing child. Darkness had settled over Willow Creek by the time Emma and Detective Martinez reached the shelter. The evening air was thick with an unseasonable fog that crept between the buildings like ghostly fingers. As they approached the entrance, Daisy's barks grew louder, more urgent. "She's never been this agitated," Emma said, fumbling with her keys. Her hands shook slightly as she unlocked the door, Martinez close behind her with one hand resting on her service weapon. The shelter's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the kennels. Most of the dogs had retreated to the backs of their enclosures, unsettled by Daisy's frenetic energy. When they reached her kennel, Emma stopped short. Daisy wasn't just barking, she was throwing herself against the gate, her eyes wild with desperation. "Easy, girl," Emma called softly, but Daisy didn't calm. Instead, she rushed to the gate, then back to the wall, then to the gate again, creating a clear pattern of movement. "She's trying to show us something," Martinez observed, her years of detective work evident in her measured tone. "This isn't random behavior." Dr. Ross appeared behind them, his medical bag in hand. "I brought a sedative, just in case." "No," Emma interrupted, a sudden certainty gripping her. "She doesn't need to be sedated. She needs to be followed." Martinez raised an eyebrow. "You want to let her lead us? At night? We have officers stationed around the Morton property," she continued, "an AK-9 unit on standby. But this is against protocol. Protocol hasn't found Sophie for 4 years," Emma said firmly. "But Daisy might." After a tense moment, Martinez nodded. "I'll call for backup to meet us there. Dr. Ross, you should come too, we might need medical expertise." Emma approached Daisy's kennel with a leash. The moment she opened the gate, Daisy's demeanor changed completely. The frantic barking ceased, replaced by an intense focus. She stood perfectly still as Emma attached the leash, then moved to the shelter's exit with purposeful steps. They followed Daisy into the night, Martinez's cruiser creeping slowly behind them with its lights off. The dog moved with unwavering certainty, leading them past the town limits and onto the old forest road. Fog swirled around their feet, and the bare branches above created twisted shadows in the beam of their flashlights. "The Morton property is just ahead," Martinez said quietly, checking her phone. Backup is 5 minutes out. But Daisy didn't turn toward the abandoned house. Instead, she veered off the road onto a nearly invisible trail, her nose low to the ground. Emma's boots crunched on dead leaves as she followed, her flashlight beam catching on thorny undergrowth and fallen trees. These marks, Dr. Ross called softly, pointing his light at a tree trunk. They're old, but they look like claw marks. Deep ones. Emma's throat tightened as she remembered the scratches that had covered Daisy when she was found. Had she been trying to get through this same undergrowth before? They walked for what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes. The fog grew thicker, and the forest pressed in around them. Then, suddenly Daisy stopped. Her entire body went rigid, and a low growl rumbled in her chest. Emma's flashlight beam cut through the mist, revealing a structure ahead. It wasn't the Morton house, this was smaller, more primitive. A hunting cabin, its wood weathered to a corpse-like gray. Vines had claimed most of the walls, and the roof sagged dangerously to one side. I know this place, Martinez whispered, drawing her weapon. It's not on any of our maps. We never knew it was here. Daisy whined, pulling Emma toward the cabin's side. As they rounded the corner, the dog's behavior became increasingly distressed. She pawed at the ground near the foundation, where years of fallen leaves had created a thick carpet. Emma knelt down, brushing away the debris. Her fingers struck something solid, a metal handle, attached to what appeared to be a trapdoor. Detective, she called, her voice trembling. I think we found something. Martinez approached with her flashlight, illuminating the rusted metal. This isn't just a hunting cabin. This is something else entirely. The sound of approaching vehicles filtered through the trees, their backup arriving. But Daisy's attention remained fixed on the trapdoor, her whimpers growing more insistent. What is it, girl? Emma asked softly. What's down there? As if in answer, Daisy threw back her head and released a howl that seemed to pierce the very fabric of the night. It wasn't her usual cry of distress. This was different. This was a sound of recognition, of memory, of a pain so deep it transcended human understanding. Martinez keyed her radio. This is Detective Martinez. We need CSI at my location immediately. And bring heavy tools. We've got a sealed trapdoor that needs to be opened. As flashlight beams began to appear through the trees and radio chatter filled the air, Emma remained kneeling beside Daisy, one hand buried in the dog's fur. The trapdoor seemed to mock them with its silence, its secrets still locked away beneath layers of rust and time. But Daisy's eyes never left it, and her body trembled with recognition. Whatever horror lay beneath that metal door, she had seen it. She had been part of it. And now, after 4 long years, she had brought them back to face it. The night grew colder as they waited for the CSI team, and fog continued to curl around the cabin like a shroud. But Emma knew with crushing certainty that by dawn, this forgotten place would give up its terrible secrets. The real question was whether they were ready for what they would find. The arrival of the CSI team transformed the quiet forest clearing into a blaze of harsh portable lights and urgent activity. Steam rose from their coffee cups into the cold night air as they photographed the scene and set up their equipment. Emma stood with Daisy at the perimeter of the illuminated area, watching as 2 officers positioned a hydraulic spreader over the rusted trapdoor. Stand back, Martinez ordered, her voice tight with anticipation. We don't know what kind of structural integrity we're dealing with here. The hydraulic spreader whined to life, its metal arms straining against decades of rust and neglect. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like a dying animal, the trapdoor gave way. A blast of stale, fetid air rushed up from the darkness below, carrying with it the unmistakable smell of decay. Daisy's reaction was immediate and violent. She lunged forward, nearly pulling the leash from Emma's grasp, her barks echoing through the trees. It took both Emma and Dr. Ross to hold her back as the CSI team began their careful descent into the cellar. Jesus Christ! One of the technicians breathed, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness below. You need to see this, Detective. Martinez descended the crude wooden stairs, her boots sending up small clouds of dust with each step. Emma watched as the detective's flashlight played across the cellar's contents, revealing a scene that would haunt her dreams for years to come. The underground space was roughly 15 feet square, its walls made of concrete blocks that wept with decades of accumulated moisture. But it wasn't the construction that made Emma's blood run cold. It was what the space contained. In one corner, a small child's bed stood against the wall, its once cheerful butterfly sheets now gray with mold. Beside it, a plastic table held the remains of what appeared to be a tea party, complete with dust-covered cups and a family of stuffed animals arranged in eternal attendance. The bear's glass eyes reflected the flashlight beams like accusations. "Over here," another technician called, photographing something on the opposite wall. Heavy chains hung from steel loops embedded in the concrete, their ends fitted with padded cuffs sized for a child's wrists and ankles. The padding was pink, decorated with faded flowers that matched the pattern of the bloody fabric found in Daisy's fur. Emma felt bile rise in her throat. "Someone lived down here," she whispered. "A little girl." "Not just lived," Martinez said grimly, pointing her flashlight at the wall beside the chains. There, at about the height a small child might reach, were dozens of scratch marks carved into the concrete. Some appeared to be counting days. Others spelled out a single word, repeated over and over. "Daddy." The CSI team worked methodically, documenting everything. They found a box of children's clothing, including several dresses with the same floral pattern as the blood-stained scrap. A shelf held elementary school workbooks, all filled out in careful handwriting, dated across months. In the corner, a bucket served as a makeshift toilet. "Detective," one of the technicians called, holding up a plastic evidence bag. Inside was another piece of blood-stained fabric, this one larger than what they'd found on Daisy. "Same pattern, same type of blood staining." Martinez examined the fabric through the plastic. "We'll need to get this to the lab immediately. If it matches the DNA from the other sample." She was interrupted by a sudden commotion above. Daisy, who had been whimpering continuously since they opened the trapdoor, suddenly went silent. Emma looked up to see the dog frozen in place, her ears pricked forward, every muscle in her body tense. "What is it, girl?" Emma asked, but she already knew. She had seen this behavior before, in the shelter when Daisy would stare at the entrance, waiting. A sound carried through the trees, the distant crunch of tires on gravel. Martinez immediately keyed her radio. "All units, we may have movement on the access road. Maintain positions but be alert. No one gets near this scene without authorization." 2 officers melted into the darkness, heading toward the sound. The rest of the team continued their work with renewed urgency, but there was a new tension in the air. They weren't just documenting a crime scene anymore, they were racing against something. Or someone. Emma knelt beside Daisy, whose eyes remained fixed on the darkness beyond the portable lights. "You know who's out there, don't you?" she whispered. "You've been trying to warn us all along." The dog's only response was a low growl that seemed to start deep in her chest. It wasn't a sound of fear, it was a sound of recognition and rage. In the cellar below, Martinez's flashlight beam caught something half hidden behind the small bed, a photo album. She pulled on latex gloves before carefully opening it. The first page showed a school portrait of Sophie Reynolds, smiling broadly at the camera, her front teeth missing. The next pages documented her captivity, Sophie sitting at the plastic table, having tea with her stuffed animals. Sophie sleeping in the small bed. Sophie chained to the wall, her face tear-stained but still trying to smile. And in some of the photos, barely visible at the edges, was a dog's tawny fur. "He documented everything," Martinez said, her professional demeanor cracking slightly. "The sick bastard kept a record." Emma felt the world tilt slightly. Daisy was here with her. She was a prisoner too. Above them, the sound of tires on gravel grew closer then stopped. Daisy's growl deepened, and her hackles rose. Whatever presence lurked in the darkness beyond their lights, she had been waiting 4 years to confront it. The hunt wasn't over. It was just beginning. The forest erupted in chaos. Flashlight beams cut through the fog as officers converged on the access road. Radio chatter crackled with urgent voices. But the vehicle they'd heard approaching was already gone, leaving behind only tire tracks in the mud and a lingering sense of menace. Inside the cabin cellar, Detective Martinez carefully bagged the photo album as evidence, her hands steady despite the horror it contained. Each photo would later become a piece in a puzzle that had eluded law enforcement for 4 years. But one detail caught her eye immediately, a reflection in a mirror captured in one of the images, showing a man's face partially obscured by a camera. "I know him," she whispered, pulling out her phone and quickly pulling up an old case file. "Emma, Dr. Ross, come look at this." They descended the stairs, leaving Daisy in the custody of an officer above. The detective held up her phone, displaying a faculty photo from Willow Creek Elementary School. Richard Grayson. He taught 3rd grade for 15 years before resigning abruptly 4 years ago. Right around the time Sophie disappeared. Emma studied the photo. The man had a gentle smile and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, the sort of teacher parents would trust implicitly. "He was Sophie's teacher?" "No," Martinez said, her voice hard. "She was still in kindergarten. But according to her mother's statement, Sophie would wave to him every morning when he supervised the crosswalk. He gave her candy sometimes, told her she reminded him of his daughter who'd passed away." Dr. Ross leaned against the damp wall, looking ill. "A predator hiding in plain sight." Martinez nodded grimly. "We interviewed him after Sophie's disappearance, along with dozens of other school staff members. Nothing seemed suspicious. He was grieving his wife's recent death, mentioned he was thinking of moving away to start fresh. 3 months later, he resigned and disappeared." "But why take Daisy?" Emma asked, looking up at the cellar entrance where they could still hear the dog's low growls. "Why keep a dog with your kidnapping victim?" The detective's expression darkened. "Control. Isolation. Sophie loved dogs. Her mother told us she'd been begging for one. What better way to ensure a child's compliance than to give them something to love, something that could be threatened?" Emma felt sick. The implications were too horrible to contemplate. A CSI technician approached with another evidence bag. "Detective, we found these behind a loose concrete block." Inside were dozens of handwritten letters, their pages yellow with age. "They're all addressed to someone named Lucy." Martinez took the bag, scanning the first letter. Lucy was Grayson's daughter. She died in a car accident along with his wife. She read further, her frown deepening. "These aren't just letters, they're delusions. He convinced himself that Sophie was Lucy, that he was saving her from the outside world. But something went wrong," Dr. Ross said quietly. "Something changed 4 years ago." Emma thought of the blood-stained fabric, the signs of violence they'd found. "Daisy happened." Martinez spread the letters on a clean evidence tarp, arranging them by date. The final letter was different from the others, the handwriting erratic, the paper stained with what looked like blood. "My dearest Lucy," Martinez read, "the dog has turned against us. I tried to discipline her, but she attacked me when I attempted to correct your behavior. She's ruined everything. The blood won't stop. I have to go away for a while, but I'll come back for you. Daddy loves you always." Emma's mind raced. Daisy protected Sophie. When Grayson tried to hurt her, Daisy attacked him. That's why she was covered in scratches when we found her, she'd been fighting. "But where did Sophie go?" Dr. Ross asked. "If Grayson was injured and fled, what happened to her?" Before Martinez could respond, urgent voices erupted from above. They rushed up the cellar stairs to find the scene had changed dramatically. More police vehicles had arrived, their lights painting the trees in alternating red and blue. Officers were stringing crime scene tape around a wider perimeter, and in the distance, they could hear dogs barking. K9 unit picked up a scent, an officer reported. They found something else, about half a mile east. Another structure. Martinez grabbed her coat. "Emma, stay here with..." She stopped. "Where's Daisy?" The officer who'd been watching her looked embarrassed. "She was right here a minute ago. When the K9 unit started barking, she just vanished into the woods. Emma felt a surge of panic, but Martinez grabbed her arm. "She's not running away," the detective said firmly. "She's running towards something. Or someone." In the distance, a dog barked, not the trained bark of a police K9, but a sound they'd all come to know well. Daisy was calling to them. "She knows where Sophie is," Emma whispered. "She's known all along." Martinez keyed her radio. "All units converge on that sound. The dog is leading us to something." As they moved through the forest, following the sound of Daisy's barks, Emma's flashlight beam caught something moving in the underbrush. A figure, hunched and limping, was trying to escape deeper into the woods. "Police! Don't move!" Martinez's voice rang out, but the figure lurched forward, disappearing into the fog. Then came a sound that stopped them all in their tracks, a scream of pain and terror, followed by the unmistakable fury of a dog attacking. Daisy had found her target. Richard Grayson had returned to reclaim his daughter, only to find that her guardian had been waiting for him all along. The forest echoed with the sounds of struggle. Officers converged on the location, their flashlight beams cutting through the dense fog to reveal a scene of chaos. Richard Grayson lay face down in the fallen leaves, Daisy standing over him with teeth bared, her golden fur almost silver in the harsh light. Blood trickled from bite wounds on his arm and shoulder. "Call off your dog!" he screamed, his wire-rimmed glasses askew, all pretense of the kindly schoolteacher stripped away. "She's ruining everything again!" "Daisy," Emma called softly. "Come!" The dog held her ground for a moment longer, a low growl rumbling in her chest, before backing away. Two officers immediately moved in to handcuff Grayson, while Martinez began reading him his rights. "You don't understand," Grayson babbled as they hauled him to his feet. "I saved her. I gave her everything, a home, love, protection from the corrupt world. She was happy with me. Ask her yourself. Where is she?" Martinez demanded, her voice sharp as steel. "Where's Sophie?" But Grayson only laughed, a hollow sound that seemed to echo through the trees. "My Lucy is gone. That beast took her from me. Just like before. Just like always." Emma watched as Daisy suddenly lifted her head, nose twitching. Before anyone could react, she bolted into the darkness, her white-tipped tail vanishing into the fog. "Follow her!" Martinez ordered, and the search team surged forward. They crashed through the underbrush, following the sound of Daisy's movement. The fog had grown thicker, turning the forest into a maze of ghostly shapes. Then, suddenly, they emerged into a small clearing. At its center stood the ruins of what might once have been a well house, its wooden structure rotted and collapsing. Daisy stood at the edge of the well, pawing at the ground and whining. When Emma approached, her flashlight beam revealed something half buried in the mud, a small silver bracelet with a butterfly charm. "Oh God!" Martinez breathed, recognizing it. "That's Sophie's. Her mother said she was wearing it the day she disappeared." The K9 units arrived, their handlers directing them to search the area. One dog immediately showed interest in a patch of ground near the well's base, where the earth appeared to have been recently disturbed. "Get the forensics team here now," Martinez ordered into her radio. "And bring shovels." The next hour passed in a blur of activity. As crime scene technicians carefully excavated the area, they discovered a narrow tunnel leading away from the well house. It had been crudely shored up with scavenged wood, creating a precarious passage just large enough for a small person to crawl through. She dug her way out, Emma realized, watching as Daisy paced anxiously around the tunnel entrance. When Grayson was injured and fled, Sophie didn't run away, she dug her way to freedom. Martinez nodded grimly. And Daisy stayed behind, either trapped or waiting to throw him off the trail if he came back. She turned to the K9 handler. "Can your dogs pick up a trail from here?" But before the handler could respond, Daisy barked sharply and took off again, this time heading east. The dog moved with purpose, no longer running but trotting steadily, looking back occasionally to ensure they were following. The forest gradually thinned, giving way to abandoned farmland. In the distance, lights glowed through the fog, a small town called Millbrook, just 10 miles from where Sophie had originally disappeared. Daisy led them to a homeless shelter on the outskirts of town, its windows warm with light despite the late hour. Inside, a tired-looking woman at the front desk looked up in surprise at the sudden influx of police officers. "We're looking for a girl," Martinez said, showing her badge. "She would have arrived here sometime in the past few months. Around 14 years old now, blonde hair." "Sarah?" the woman interrupted, her eyes widening. "You mean Sarah? She came to us 3 months ago, said she'd run away from an abusive home." She paused, studying Martinez's face. "But that's not her real name, is it? Where is she now?" "Upstairs, room 204. She works in our kitchen, helping prepare meals. Sweetest girl you'll ever meet, but there's something haunted about her. She flinches at loud noises, won't talk about her past. And she's always drawing pictures of a dog." Emma felt her heart constrict as Daisy whined softly beside her. They climbed the stairs quietly, Martinez in the lead. At room 204, she knocked gently. "Sophie? Sophie Reynolds?" Silence, then a small voice. Who's there?" "I'm Detective Martinez with the Willow Creek Police. We've been looking for you for a very long time, Sophie. And we brought someone who's been looking for you too." The door opened a crack, revealing a thin face with wary eyes that had seen too much. Then those eyes fell on Daisy, and time seemed to stop. "Guardian?" Sophie whispered, using the name she'd given her protector so long ago. Daisy's tail began to wag, slowly at first, then with increasing joy. Sophie fell to her knees, throwing her arms around the dog's neck, and burst into tears. "She saved me," Sophie sobbed as Emma and Martinez knelt beside her. "When he got angry, when he would try to hurt me, she always protected me. And when I finally escaped through the tunnel, she stayed behind to make sure he couldn't follow. She sacrificed herself for me." Martinez squeezed the girl's shoulder gently. "Your parents never stopped looking for you, Sophie. They never gave up hope. And Daisy never stopped trying to lead us to you," Emma added softly. "Even after all these years." As if understanding she was being discussed, Daisy gently licked the tears from Sophie's face, her tail still wagging. The trauma of the past 4 years still showed in both of them, in Sophie's too thin frame and haunted eyes, in Daisy's lingering fears and night terrors. But they had found each other again, and that was a beginning. Later that night, as Sophie was reunited with her stunned and joyful parents at the police station, Emma watched Daisy sitting calmly at the girl's feet. The dog's eyes never left Sophie's face, her guardian instincts still strong after all this time. "What happens now?" Dr. Ross asked quietly, standing beside Emma. "They'll both need time to heal," she replied. "But they'll do it together. Some bonds can't be broken, not even by years of darkness." Outside, the fog was finally lifting, revealing a sky full of stars. Dawn was approaching, bringing with it the promise of a new day, for a lost girl found, for a faithful guardian reunited with her charge, and for a community that could finally begin to heal from a wound that had festered for far too long. In the end, it wasn't sophisticated police work or advanced forensics that had solved the case. It was the unwavering love and determination of a dog who had never forgotten her promise to protect an innocent child, no matter the cost. And in that simple truth lay the most profound lesson of all, that sometimes the purest hearts and the deepest loyalty can be found in those who never speak a word, but whose actions echo with the power of unconditional love.